Hi there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. Now I know a lot of you guys out there think that I'm a xenophobic alien and aquatic mammal hating regressive. Check out our t-shirts down below. But the reality is it's not my hatred for aliens and aquatic mammals that define me, it's my love for humanity. It's about uplifting one group, not necessarily putting that other group down. Plus, the only alien species I dislike are generally the ones that can't be socialized with or incorporated into our society, like the Enzati, who feed on the brains of other sentient beings. Sometimes you just have to repress the more dangerous and crazy species. But anyway, today I want to showcase my bountiful compassion, which occasionally extends to near human species, like the Twi'leks. Today I want to talk about the Twi'lek race and the major issues that have left these people in a perpetual cycle of exploitation and oftentimes slavery. Now, before we continue, guys, we are trying to grow our Facebook channel so that, like Darth Sidious, will be much harder to kill if, let's say, our YouTube channel gets destroyed by a bunch of rebels with proton torpedoes. So please follow us on our Facebook at Generation Tech and caption this photo for me while you're there. We'll pick the best caption and give the winner a $50 gift card. Now, Star Wars was created a long time ago in an era where creators and artists had a lot more freedom and audiences were less prone to be triggered by things that, upset them. It also helped that this complicated world takes place in another galaxy. This allowed Star Wars to introduce a lot of messed up concepts into its lore, like slavery, exploitation, the occasional ancestral hookup, but at the same time not draw too close to home so that it made viewers uncomfortable. The Twi'leks are a historically repressed group of individuals who, as long as I remember, have been shafted by the galaxy. To start off, if the Twi'leks were in a civilization game, they would start off on a desert square with no resources and surrounded by hostile barbarian tribes and enemy factions. Their home planet of Ryloth, for instance, was just a terrible place, too wild and dangerous for easy expansion for primitive civilizations. First of all, there were no large bodies of water on Ryloth, only small patches of ice on the dark side of the planet. Ryloth also had 5 moons, which means that not only did the planet have a strange day and night cycle, it also had very turbulent weather phenomenon, including massive equatorial storms you would more commonly see on a gas giant planet like Jupiter. It wasn't uncommon for these winds to reach speeds up to 500 kilometers per hour. In American, that translates to an F-150 with rocket boosters on the back. Here on Earth, winds like that are only seen in F5 tornadoes. And so these massive storms make it almost impossible to erect any kind of freestanding structure on the surface of this planet. This means that Twi'lek colonies and villages were generally built on the side of mountains or underground. But not even those places were safe from the occasional heat storm, which could raise the temperature up to 300 Celsius, which is about the highest heat you can get in a standard oven if you put it on broiler mode. Needless to say, anything that survives on the surface of Ryloth, including the Twi'leks, have to be very hardy and able to survive in the most extreme situations. Unfortunately, there are a lot of predatory animals on Ryloth too as a result. The Twi'leks were amongst the most terrifying. These were massive insects with hardened exoskeletons and spear-like appendages all over their body. They lived in massive caverns and tunnel systems underneath the planet's surface, and worse yet, they often traveled in large packs. On a not-so-routine trip to Ryloth, Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader are almost killed by a swarm of these insect monsters. So through the course of their evolution, the Twi'leks have had to spend a massive amount of time trying to figure out how to survive on this pretty ridiculous planet, time that could have been spent on developing their art, culture, the sciences, and so on. If we look at our own planet, the key elements for the development of advanced civilizations are usually a source of fresh water, some type of vegetation that can be cultivated for food, and large non-predatory animals that can be domesticated for labor. The last thing is actually very important. This is why there are still tribes in the jungles of Papua New Guinea that live like primitive people. In the jungles they live in, there are no large mammals for them to utilize and only some tubers that they can domesticate for crops. Without certain starting resources like domesticated livestock, it's very hard to unlock the rest of your tech tree, and you might just stagnate as a culture. Luckily, the Twi'leks did have one beast of burden known as rykrits, which they domesticated for labor and also used for food. But by the time the rest of the galaxy finally discovered Ryloth and the Twi'leks, they were still pretty behind in technological terms. They had some rudimentary mechanical technology like windmills that they used to power factories and other kind of things. But because of the crazy weather patterns on the planet, they didn't have the ability to actually cultivate traditional crops and increase their population. Instead, they had to rely on harvesting fungi and mold that grew underground, where it was safe. More importantly, the Twi'leks never developed space travel on their own and quickly found themselves at the mercy of more advanced civilizations. Now, Ryloth was in a region of the Outer Rim territories that unfortunately was pretty close to Hutt space. The Hutts themselves also evolved on a terrifyingly dangerous planet, but they were able to develop advanced technology and eventually figure out how to create advanced weapons and also space flights. They would eventually actually build an empire on the back of slaves and spice trading. Ryloth unfortunately had a lot of tough and hardy individuals who were perfect for the slave trade, and they also had a lot of very exotic spices that the Hutts were after. One could say that the Hutts and Ryloth were built for one another. Because the Twi'leks lacked technology, they also didn't have the leverage to protect themselves from hostile outsiders like the Hutts. Instead of being able to sell their natural resources so they could build capital and invest in their own people and their own planet, the Hutts came in, took over, and exploited all of those resources. It's a simple tactic that we've seen happen time and time again in our own history, a more technologically advanced culture clashing and then taking advantage of a more primitive society. One of the favorite spices mined from Ryloth was known as rill. It was highly addictive and hallucinogenic and popular amongst the galactic elite. Because it was a black market substance, it also lacked the same kind of regulation and oversight that you might see in a more legal trade, like Durasteel or something. For instance, if Ryloth was known for having deposits of kyber crystals, it's very likely that the Republic and eventually the Jedi would come and oversee any mining operations and make sure that things were, on the level, aka no slavery. The other resource that Ryloth had plenty of were the Twi'lek people. As mentioned before, the Twi'leks were hardy individuals, having figured out how to survive in one of the most inhospitable parts of the galaxy. But because there was a lack of wealth on this planet, the average Twi'lek didn't have access to healthcare and education or even stable food sources. They were completely impoverished and they didn't have control of their own destinies. This means that unfortunately human trafficking and slavery were quite common for young Twi'leks. Twi'lek women, who were known for their beauty, grace, and charisma, were commonly employed as singers, dancers, and sex workers by everyone from Hutt warlords to high-end Coruscanti nightclubs. To avoid stringent Republic anti-slavery laws, false contracts were usually drawn up, but this was just a way to legalize what essentially was slavery. This was a terrible and brutal life to live, and oftentimes there was no way to escape out of servitude. Twi'lek men lacked the same sex appeal that Twi'lek women had, but they suffered an equally terrible fate. They were usually sent to work in spice mines in horrible and dangerous conditions. Now, some Twi'lek men were lucky enough to work their way up a criminal organization to a mid-level manager kind of position. Because most Twi'leks were pushed into a life of servitude, we rarely see wealth being exchanged from one generation of Twi'leks to another. There's just never any real type of growth on Ryloth. Twi'leks just have to try their hardest to survive and resist the erosion that constantly beats them down. When the Separatist Alliance droid army came to Ryloth, they replaced the Hutt overlords but continued exploiting the Twi'leks through slavery and resource extraction. The same thing would happen when the Galactic Empire came to town, but as long as we remember, the Twi'leks have also had resistance movements trying to fight against foreign occupation. Individuals like Cham Syndulla, a revolutionary, understood that the only way to free his people from poverty and a never-ending cycle of slavery was by fighting for freedom and gaining control of the resources on their own planet. But even when the Twi'leks were able to win their freedom after the Galactic Civil War ended, Ryloth was still way behind most of the other planets in the region. Trade protectionism of some sort would need to be created in order to help domestic industries to grow. And so Ryloth actually chooses to be independent, and they don't join the New Republic like many of the other Outer Rim planets. The reality is, in a market system, a country or a city or an individual who does not have access to economic opportunities will also lack access to freedom. So you can have constitutions and politicians talk about freedom and democracy. You can even have laws that prevent exploitation and slavery, but at the end of the day, strong individuals will always take advantage of the weak, and so if the Twi'leks are to survive and remove themselves out of this cycle of exploitation, they really have to control their own financial futures. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you think about my breakdown of the Twi'leks and Ryloth. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.